When I was in Vice as an undercover, I spent approximately 18 months walking the streets of Queens, doing prostitution. The only difference was that I was working undercover and this was their actual life. But we had a lot of similar stories. To hear their stories and not able to talk to them about my story and how I survived, it was heartbreaking a lot of the times. My name is Katrina Brownlee, and when I was 22 years old, I lived with my ex-fiancé in a house of horror. I don't remember not having a black eye, whether it been the right one, the left one, it was a busted lip. It was always something. That's why shades became a signature for me. I called the police on him several times. He was a New York City correction officer. And every time he would flash that badge, and every time he flashed that badge, they would walk away. That badge was much more important than my life.
She got to the point where she feared for her safety and the safety of her kids. And that's when she decided no more. But when the decision was made to leave, the risk factor for Katrina went through the roof. My name is Carrie Herzog. In January of 1993, I was an assistant district attorney. I don't think she in any way could have foreseen what was going to happen to her when she came through that door.
He opened the door, and he just had like a weird look on his face. It was strange. And he pointed a gun to me and said, "This is the day you die, bitch." And he shot me in my stomach. And then he shot me again. And
he emptied the gun after the first 5, reloaded, and proceeded to shoot her again 5 more times. Each time he would say to Katrina, "Are you ready to die, Katrina?" Bang. "Is this the day you're going to die, Katrina?" Bang. "You know you deserve this, Katrina." Bang. This was a man on a mission, and he was armed and deadly. This could have easily been a homicide, but because of Katrina's will to live and will to survive, it wasn't.
God had a whole different plan for me. My story starts from a very dark place, and it becomes a story of grace, a story of love, and a story of hope.
Why did you want to become a cop?
I wanted to become a good cop.
There's a difference?
Yeah. A good cop has empathy. A good cop cares about people that they have to protect and have to serve. I was a great cop.
This is the photograph that says suffering to me.
Assistant DA Carrie Herzog will never forget opening the case file.
This shows a path of blood through the living room and leading into the adjacent room. It literally took my breath away.
Carrie rushed to the intensive care unit at Brookhaven Memorial Hospital on Long Island as soon as she learned the victim was still alive.
There was a horror show unfolding right before my eyes. The first thing that came to my head is, how did this woman even survive?
In the afternoon of January 9th, 1993, a car came screeching up to Brookhaven's emergency room entrance. The driver hurriedly put a woman in a wheelchair and pushed her in the door, then sped off. That woman was Katrina Brownlee. Barely conscious and riddled with bullets, the 22-year-old mother of two somehow managed to tell authorities who did this to her and where he lived.
That's the house right there.
Lead detective Raymond Blasco raced to the house where a man calmly opened the door and said, "I was expecting you." It was Katrina's ex-fiance, Alex Irvin.
I proceeded to arrest him at that point. The crime scene indicated a violent, brutal attack, and that the victim, during it, was moving around from room to room, trying to get away during the attack. The floor of the bathroom, there's a lot of blood on everything in the bathroom. It shows extensive bleeding because of the blood loss. I did not believe she would survive.
Neither did the young assistant DA. Carrie took a dying declaration from Katrina at the hospital to use as evidence for a grand jury.
Her voice was just above a whisper. Each breath took a certain amount of labor on her part, but she was able to do what we needed to have her do. I didn't think I'd ever see her again.
But Carrie didn't know just who she was dealing with. Katrina had been beating the odds most of her life.
Right there, that was my bedroom, right there.
Katrina was a struggling 18-year-old single mom living in the Brevoort projects in Brooklyn when she met the man she thought would get her the house with a white picket fence she'd always dreamed of. A correction officer on New York's notorious Rikers Island. It was Alex Irvin.
So when I get into this relationship with this person, it's a way out.
It's a way out.
I was in survival mode. And he had a car, wasn't used to riding around in a fancy car. He was a correction officer.
He had a job.
He had a career, a gun. So to me, it was like, okay, my man got a gun, he got a good job. I'm from the projects, and look at me.
You thought you'd escaped.
Correct. Right, that's what I'm thinking, like I'm winning. When actually I was losing.
Katrina says he showed his violent temper almost immediately.
That's where it began here, out in those streets. Yeah.
He would beat you in the street?
Oh, yeah.
Katrina knew she should end it, but says her grandmother, the only adult in her life she trusted, convinced her to stay.
My grandmother said to me, you know, this man has a job and he can provide for you, and you have a daughter and he's willing to take on your daughter and to take care of you, and I think that this is something you should try to consider. So when your grandmother tells you that, then you think, well, maybe, you know what, maybe I should do this.
This is knowing that he had physically assaulted you.
Yeah.
How do you see that now?
It was the worst advice that I could have ever gotten.
They soon had a baby together, a girl, Katrina's second daughter. But Katrina says it didn't stop the beatings.
What would spark his anger?
Maybe it was just a bad day at Rikers Island. Maybe I didn't want to have sex with him. Maybe the baby was crying. Maybe I had on something he didn't like to see me in.
He was that abusive.
Yeah, it was that abusive.
Katrina says she called 911 several times.
Every time that I called the police on him, they either would come and tell us to work it out, or he would have a separate conversation either outside or in the room with them, and they would walk away.
She called it the blue wall of silence. The minute they saw his badge, she says, they left. After a while, Katrina says she stopped calling.
I had no respect for cops. I had no respect for them at all.
In 1992, Alex Irvin moved Katrina and the two girls from Brooklyn to a small house in Medford, Long Island. But she says the abuse continued and only got worse. Finally, after 5 years of getting beaten black and blue, Katrina said, enough.
I was pregnant, and I said to myself, I'm not bringing another child into this toxic, violent relationship with this man, and that I am going to save my money, get some strength from somewhere, somehow, and get out of this relationship. And that's what I did.
Katrina and her daughters moved to a local motel, but after a month, she ran out of money. Desperate, she called Alex Irvin. Katrina says he was like a different person and even offered to help her get back on her feet.
We talked and were friendly with one another, something that I had never experienced with him, ever.
You were hopeful.
Yeah, and I didn't think he was clever enough to try to set me up.
On January 9th, Katrina says she walked straight into a trap. She left her older daughter with a neighbor and went with her younger daughter to Irvin's house. This is what she told us happened next. A warning, you may find it disturbing.
He opened the door, and he just had a weird look on his face. It was strange. I went to place my youngest daughter in her bed because she was asleep. And as soon as I came out, he shot me in my stomach. And then he shot me again. I fell back on our couch and I looked down and my stomach had flattened and I wasn't bleeding. And I said to him, I'm like, why am I not bleeding? And I remember him saying, shut up. And I remember trying to get up and crawl. And he shot me in my arm here. I remember picking up the phone and trying to call 911. The phone lines were cut.
You're in the living room.
They're crawling on the floor like a dog. I remember I looked up to him and he took his foot and he kicked me in my face. This man tortured me. He tortured me. He tortured me.
This was an angry, angry man.
Alex Irvin didn't just want Katrina dead, says Carrie Herzog. He wanted her to suffer.
You can almost hear the defendant saying, it ain't over till I say it's over. He was mocking her as he was firing on her. Is this the bullet that's going to do it, Katrina?
And he was in no hurry, says Katrina. When she could no longer crawl, he put her in the bed and covered her gunshot wounds with Band-Aids. At one point, he carried her to the bathroom, leaving behind a blood-stained blueprint of the attack.
This didn't happen within 20 minutes or 30 minutes. This was a long period of time that he's torturing me and shooting me.
Over the course of an hour and a half, the correction officer emptied his service revolver 2 times at the pregnant mother of 2.
And ultimately, he shot me 10 times.
Alex Alex Irvin had planned for everything, says Katrina. The locked doors and windows, the cut phone line. Everything but a knock on the door.
As Katrina lay bleeding on the floor, there was an unexpected visit by a family friend of Katrina's fiance. And upon entering the home, he looked at something which can only be described as something out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
According to the friend's statement to police, Alex Irvin told him he had shot Katrina and then he flipped out. Irvin then led his young friend, only 20 at the time, to the bathroom. Katrina was lying face down on the bathroom floor. Panicked, the young man picked her up and carried her to the car. Irvin helped him put Katrina in the back seat. The two men headed to the hospital with the friend driving.
The entire way, Katrina was in and out of consciousness, and he was begging her to hold on, that they were close to getting help. Don't go, Katrina, don't go.
It was the young man who put Katrina in the wheelchair that day, her wounds still covered with Band-Aids.
If he hadn't come by that house.
Oh, I wouldn't be talking to you. I would not be talking to you.
Katrina was rushed into surgery as soon as she got to the hospital after the attack. Multiple operations followed in the days ahead. But doctors were unable to remove 6 of the bullets that had entered her body, says Carrie.
The placement removal could have been more dangerous to her than leaving the bullets in place.
After days of drifting in and out of consciousness, Katrina finally woke up.
The first thing I wanted to know, where was my baby that I was having? Where were my children? That was the first thing I said.
There she was, having been brutalized, and her first concern was for her children. It made me want to cry. It makes me want to cry right now.
Katrina was told her 2 daughters were safe and staying with a relative. Sadly, Katrina says, the baby she was carrying, a boy, didn't make it.
Most of the injuries were concentrated between her chest and her pelvis. And it became evident that future children were not going to be in the cards for Katrina.
That wasn't all, says Carrie.
She was very limited in her mobility. There were concerns that she might not be able to walk again.
Katrina remembers the day the doctor delivered the grim news.
I said, what, when you say that, and I'm not gonna walk again and never have a normal life, like, what does that mean? And he said, you're gonna be confined to a wheelchair and you'll have people that have to take care of you. And then I said to him, I don't have anybody to take care of me. I'm homeless, I don't have a place to live. I said, I didn't have a place to live before I came here.
And you're thinking, what am I gonna do? Was it fear, desperation, at your wit's end, or all of that wrapped up into one?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm really all alone. I really am rock bottom. I'm at the lowest place that I think a human being can be at that point. Your son is murdered. Can't take care of your children. You have nowhere to live. You have no family. It doesn't get no worse than that.
Alex Irvin's mother let Katrina move into her house in Brooklyn, unoccupied at the time. Katrina had round-the-clock care and daily sessions with a speech and physical therapist. But deeply depressed, she refused to work at her therapy.
Katrina fell into a hole that was so deep and so wide that she couldn't see bottom and she couldn't see side to side.
Then one day, her physical therapist gave her hope that she would fully recover.
He said, I believe, something tells me that you're gonna walk again. And I don't know what it was that day. Gave me the will, gave me the hope that it would be done. And I started from the wheelchair, then I went to the walker, and then I went to a cane, and then I started to walk. So that was a process.
Katrina devoted her entire being to showing the doctors she could get better.
So what were the things they said you couldn't do?
I wasn't gonna walk again. I wasn't gonna have a normal life again.
So you went, check,
Right, it was like,
check,
check,
check.
check, 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 check.
She also checked off another box: self-esteem.
I started to believe in myself. I started to build up who I was as a person.
But the fates weren't done with Katrina Cook Brownlee. She was about to be tested yet again. There were many stops along the way that could have derailed Katrina Cook Brownlee's journey out of darkness. Katrina says that getting thrown out of Alex Irvin's mother's house in Brooklyn while still recovering was one of them.
She asked me to write a letter stating that I shot myself 10 times so that her son did not go to jail.
When Katrina refused, she says the mother booted her to the street.
I became even more homeless. I don't know how much homeless you could be, but then I really became homeless. I am standing in front of a shelter where I used to live.
Katrina, who by then had her 2 girls back, ended up in this homeless shelter on the Lower East Side of New York.
Rats were there, roaches was there. It was really, really bad here, really bad.
What is going through your head as you were looking at your 2 daughters?
I'm in survival mode. Everything for me at this point is survival.
Stay alive.
Just stay alive.
Protect my girls.
Protect my girls because I felt like I had already failed. They didn't choose him. I chose him, you know.
Katrina says the shelter was so filthy, she wouldn't use the bathroom.
I remember putting my youngest daughter in the sink in McDonald's to bathe her, and me as a grown woman having to wash up at a sink.
While Katrina and her girls were struggling to survive, Carrie Herzog was methodically building a strong case against Alex Irvin.
I was going to do everything in my power to bring justice to Katrina. I fought for her tooth and nail.
But Katrina, who had been cooperating with the prosecution, started backing away. Carrie discovered that Alex Irvin, against court orders, had been calling and threatening Katrina from jail.
I wanted to rain down on him with the white-hot intensity of 1,000 suns. The arrogance for him to be having this conversation with her from inside the jail was outrageous. He needs to pay.
But then the defense presented this letter to the judge, purportedly written by Katrina herself.
I, Katrina Cook, the victim in this case, has decided that I don't want to press charges due to duress at the time of my accident. This is a woman who had been shot 10 times, and here she's portraying it as an accident. And then the icing on the cake, if I am subpoenaed to court, I will testify on the defendant's behalf. I was horrified, but I wasn't necessarily surprised. Katrina had already been placed in the position of nearly seeing her life ended. If she showed any cooperation with me or the court, it could be worse for her.
Years later, Katrina would tell Carrie she did not write that letter, but at the time, Carrie was convinced she had. She got Katrina on the phone.
She said, "I'm not coming in. I'm not going to talk about it. In fact, I'm going to disappear, and you're never going to find me." Rage was starting to build up inside of me. I let out this bellow and said, "Katrina, I will hunt you down like a dog if I have to." And then she hung up on me.
Despite issuing a subpoena, Carrie didn't expect Katrina to appear in court. But even without her star witness, Carrie believed she would win a conviction. In April 1994, 1 year and 3 months after the attack, jury selection began. They were on day 4 when suddenly the courtroom door flew open.
I turn around and I see her. She's in a brightly colored dress, and her presence that day actually made me gasp out loud. I never, ever expected her to appear, but there she was.
I had decided that I'm going to walk in this courtroom and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I didn't even look at him. I wasn't giving him that power because at that point I had got back my power and got back my control, so I wasn't even going to look at him. He didn't even matter to me.
I think that the defendant saw the whites of her eyes that day and knew that the game was over and she was going to do whatever she needed to do to take him down. She was back. She was back with a vengeance.
Soon after, Alex Irvin pled guilty to all charges: attempted murder in the 2nd degree, assault in the 1st degree, and criminal use of a firearm. There would be no trial. His sentence was now in the hands of the judge.
I was very angry that he took the plea.
She was more angry, I think, than I was. She lost her mind. I was calming her down because I said, I've been through this already. Ain't nothing gonna happen to him. He got that shield. There's nothing gonna happen to him.
Carrie made an impassioned plea to the judge to give Katrina's abuser a minimum of 20 years behind bars. But the judge did not heed Carrie's pleas. He gave Alex Irvin the lightest sentence possible, 5 to 15 years.
After hearing that, it was almost a blind fury that took over me. I gathered up my belongings and returned to my office, and I kicked my garbage can from one end of the office to the other. And I actually kept that garbage can for the rest of my career with this huge dent in its side.
Carrie couldn't deliver the sentence they both wanted, but she did deliver something perhaps even more important.
Nobody ever cared enough to fight for me. She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She gave me hope when I didn't have hope for myself. I'm grateful to her.
What do you think of the prison sentence that Alex Irvin received? Go inside the case at 48hours.com.
With her ex-fiancé and would-be killer in prison, Katrina Cook Brownlee focused on her future, a future that included a job at a very unlikely place, the New York City Police Department.
So the criminal justice system failed you.
They failed me.
And then you go and enter.
The criminal justice system. Yeah.
That was logical for you.
Yeah, I was like, nope, I'm doing it.
You could have knocked me over with a feather.
No one was more surprised than Katrina's former advocate and now friend, Carrie Herzog.
Katrina and I actually talked about why she would join the police department. And one of the things she mentioned that, the best way to change a system is from the inside out.
A system that Katrina says repeatedly turned its back on her when she'd call 911 after being beaten in the years before she was shot. Katrina wanted to become what she says she needed all those years ago, a good cop.
Why not? Why wouldn't I want to help, protect, and serve just because I didn't receive it. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't want to help others.
In July 2001, 8.5 years after her brutal attack, Katrina was one of 1,600 new recruits sworn in at the NYPD's Police Academy. They would go on to be known as the 9/11 class. When just 2 months into training, Katrina and her fellow police cadets became first responders on September 11th.
That was like one of the times where I was like, maybe I don't think I can do this. I pushed through it because the other people that was in the academy also, we all was feeling the same. And I think we just basically was going off of each other's strength.
As Katrina started a new life within the criminal justice system, Alex Irvin, the correction officer turned convict, was released from prison after serving 10 years. Carrie recalls Katrina's reaction.
It was almost a sigh of resignation when the time finally came up.
I was at the beginning of my career, and I wanted to really just put the energy into that and not into him coming out.
From the start, Katrina sought out a tough assignment, going undercover in Brooklyn and Queens, even adopting this cigar-smoking persona to catch drug dealers.
Anything that entailed undercover, I did it.
Anything.
Anything.
So it put you in some dangerous situations.
Oh, absolutely.
I asked myself, why would someone who's been through what Katrina has been through put herself into that situation? And then I think, what can anyone do to scare her at this stage of her life? She was right at death's door and came through.
Right now, we are on a strip that I used to work when I was in Vice, doing undercover work. And this was kind of like home for me. Many a days, many a nights.
Though the mission was to arrest pimps and those soliciting prostitution, Katrina felt a connection to the women she encountered.
Being out there in the streets, I realized that each and every one of these young ladies were me in some form or fashion. It allowed me to realize how it was important for me to do my work to the best of my ability while I was out there.
After 5 hard years working undercover on the streets, Katrina took to the streets again as a community affairs officer.
I just felt that I had so much that I could give back being a police officer.
Despite being the good cop she had always wanted to be, Katrina worried that the secret of her past would hurt her career.
So you're on your dream job, you're doing a great job, and yet you're living with always the fear of being discovered.
Correct.
Your past
My past.
coming back to haunt you.
Yep. Every single day I went to work, I always thought that.
You never shared this secret.
Nope. It was painful not to be able to.
Painful because Katrina believes that the trauma she suffered would have made some at the NYPD question if she was fit to serve.
I don't want her on this job. She's a domestic violence. She may go off and kill somebody. She might not be mentally stable.
Though still in fear of being outed, Katrina forged ahead, becoming a detective first grade, the NYPD's highest investigative rank.
It wasn't many women that were first grade detectives.
No one handed anything to Katrina. What Katrina has done, she has earned. It's still amazing to me now to think about the progress that she made. And not just progress, success. She and I have talked about it, that success is the best revenge.
And Katrina wasn't done yet.
never, ever, ever, ever give up on yourself. I don't care who's against you. Believe in yourself.
Katrina Cook Brownlee had spent a lifetime defying the odds, climbing out of poverty, surviving a near fatal attack, walking after believing she would never walk again. And in the final years of her NYPD career, she would buck the odds once again.
When you were growing up in Brooklyn, did you ever expect you would be working at the mayor's mansion?
No, never. Not even remotely close.
In 2014, Katrina became one of the few Black women in NYPD history assigned to protect a New York City mayor when she was chosen to serve on Mayor Bill de Blasio's advanced security detail.
You're just one step ahead.
I'm just one step ahead. If I'm walking into a ditch, he's gonna follow me into that ditch, right? If I'm walking into the sunset, he coming in that sunset.
In 2021, after 20 years on the force, Katrina retired from the NYPD. In her last meeting with the mayor, she finally opened up about something she had been hiding for decades, her past.
And I said, well, Mr. Mayor, I wrote a book. And he said, well, what is the book about? And I said, well, Mr. Mayor, I got shot 10 times. And he took a deep breath. And he was like, but you never said anything. And I said, I wasn't supposed to.
She was carrying around a secret, and now she has been unburdened.
I think people looking at you would never have an inkling that you had lived the life you lived.
I often wonder and ask myself that. Do I look like this has happened to me? You know, and I have scars, right? So for a long time, the scars used to bother me. So I put tattoos on my stomach so that when I looked in the mirror when I'm getting dressed, I didn't see it.
If I may be so bold to ask, what are your tattoos?
Roses. Just a bunch of roses. Yeah, flowers. Because that's what I felt like that's what I became.
Katrina has also found a way to let go of the emotional scars.
In spite of everything that has happened to me, right? I forgive. I forgive.
You forgave your assailant, your abuser?
Yeah. I had to. I had to forgive him. So I can get back my control, so I can get back my power, and so that I can have a peace within myself. There's no peace when you harbor in anger, when you're mad. There's no peace in that.
You remember Katrina?
When she was young, yes, I remember her.
We went back with Katrina to the projects where she had grown up.
I remember when you was growing up with your grandmother.
That Trina, you remember Trina?
She's moved away, but not so far that she has forgotten all the other Katrinas who are now where she once was.
What's next for you?
Just to tell my story and to continue to work on my organization with my girls, young ladies of our future.
Katrina's organization has been mentoring young ladies for the past 10 years.
You don't want any other girl or woman
To ever have to go through 5% of what I went through. If you build and you teach and give young people these tools, you save them every single time.
Oh, you know I'm checking report cards.
She has that helping gene in her.
This is what I have to give to these girls is love.
Good.
She is offering help that surpasses what she had.
How does the Katrina sitting here today differ from that 22-year-old Katrina?
Oh, wow. The 22-year-old Katrina was lost, broken, forgotten, violated. At the lowest point that a person can be. And now today I feel like I am a beautiful Black queen that fought the fight. Yeah.
A young woman vanishes. Her missing phone could provide critical clues. Just one problem.
A needle in a haystack in a huge moving body of water.
How can police do what seems impossible?
I think I got the phone.
48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
I wake up every single day and I cry and I miss her. It's so frustrating because you can look back and you wish you did more. Maybe my sister was scared to go to the law because her husband was a police officer.
Jones County District Attorney's Office. I believe Seth Peralt was an individual that had a lot of people fooled.
Say hi, honey. He doesn't want to say hi.
I think he hid behind a badge and wore a mask every day. Nice house, nice car, law enforcement. But behind that door to that house, he was pretty abusive.
Stop the camera. No, let's not. Let's tell the truth.
Stop the camera.
No.
Maybe she was scared to get out.
It's February 3rd, 2020. Set the scene for me. What happened?
I'm sitting at my desk in my office. That was it. And the phone rings, and it's the police chief. He said, I got Seth Peralt on the phone. He's told me his wife had killed herself. And I knew that we needed to get there and get this matter investigated and do it right.
Describe what you saw when you got to the scene.
Seth Peralt sitting on the front steps. He's sitting there, hands holding over his face. I asked him to go inside and search the house, and he gave consent for that.
Had you ever seen a suicide that looked like that?
I've never seen anything like that. Her body is flat on her back, her legs are almost together, and her arms are tucked against her side with her hands cupped. This wasn't right.
He's worked a lot of cases. He told me, he said, the scene is not right. There's something not adding up.
And the more we investigated, the odder it got. Obviously, we have a death investigation here. I asked him, would he come downtown to talk to us further?
I don't know how this happened.
He said that they were in bed and they were arguing.
All I know is my wife was upset. She looked at me and said, I can't do it no more.
He loved her. She was his world. He'd never done anything to harm her ever.
My wife looked at me and executed herself. And if you look at the logistics of it, you're going to see that I had nothing to do with it.
We all called Sheriff Sills that night and said, we know our sister didn't do this. We know she didn't take her own life, that he had something to do with this.
While looking in your face as a law enforcement officer, I did not do anything. I had nothing to do with it.
7 months later, the medical examiner's report comes out. And what does it say?
Suicide. Well, I was astounded.
Dr. Dersau is a renowned medical examiner. So her certification of suicide, we thought was basically open shut. You have to remember, she works for the state. I'm Justin Kinney, an attorney for Seth Peralt. It all came down to the forensics. Could the state actually prove that Seth had pulled the trigger and shot his wife in the head?
Just an hour and a half after Seth Peralt said his 44-year-old wife, Amanda, shot herself right in front of him, he was struggling to tell his story.
I'm in shock. My wife of 8 years that I love more than anything in this world. I don't know even where to start, sir. I've lost everything in my life.
44-year-old Peralt, then a police officer for the city of Eatonton, Georgia, told the county sheriff Howard Sills that his wife Amanda had shot herself in the head.
What did he say happened?
He said that they were in bed and they were arguing, and then all of a sudden she just produced the gun out of thin air and executed herself.
I just sat there and watched my wife execute herself.
In all my years of questioning anybody for suicide, I have never heard anybody use the term executed.
I knew she hadn't. I knew that he was lying.
From the very beginning, Angie and Alicia Johnson say they had questions about what happened to their sister Amanda.
We knew better. We knew our sister. Amanda loved life.
She wouldn't put us through this.
About 8 years earlier, in the fall of 2011, a recently divorced Amanda met Seth Peralt online.
I remember being kind of excited about it. He treated her differently from some of the past relationships she had been in where, you know, she wasn't respected.
Seth, battling cancer and unemployed at the time, seemed to fall for Amanda fast and hard.
And they moved in fairly quick. Like, he had her move in within 6 months of them meeting.
Seth was living an hour away with his mother, who was caring for him. But Angie says Amanda would quickly take over the role of Seth's caretaker.
When she moved out there, he didn't want her to work.
They say Seth's parents were paying all of the couple's bills and helping with expenses for Seth's daughter from a previous relationship.
So Seth was basically dependent on his family.
Very much.
Very much.
And Amanda was dependent on Seth.
For the longest time, like, he wouldn't let her have any kind of phone, cell phone, or anything like that. It would be his phone or a landline.
She didn't even have a car to drive. He monitored her constantly.
As time went on, Alicia and Angie say they saw less and less of their sister.
He kept us from being able to see her. So
She didn't come to like any of our Christmas events or like any of our events because she had to host for his family and cook for all of them.
Amanda lived with Seth for 5 years. Then, on June 23, 2017, the couple surprised everyone when they quietly went to the local courthouse and got married. Angie and Alicia believe the only reason Seth married their sister was to help him get custody of his daughter.
That's why I feel like he asked her to marry him.
Seth's custody battle had been going on for almost exactly a year at that point.
Do you think Seth marrying Amanda helped him gain custody?
Absolutely.
Seth's attorney, Justin Kenny.
If Amanda was going to be present in his daughter's life, they had to get married. I think that was one of the paramount issues for him to gain custody.
Kenny says Seth did love Amanda and his daughter and was just trying to do what he thought was best for everyone.
This was a guy that doted on his daughter. He was a family man. He would dote on his wife. I just thought he was a stand-up individual.
A few months after Amanda and Seth were married, he was granted custody of his daughter. A little over a year later, he was hired by the Eatonton Police Department, and his father bought him this house near Lake Oconee.
She loved their new home.
This should have been everything she hoped for.
Yeah, it was, you know, except for the relationship.
Alicia and Angie say they didn't know just how bad things had gotten, but were hearing more and more stories of fighting fueled by alcohol.
I've heard stories in interviews that, you know, when they were sober, they were loving toward one another. But it's when alcohol came into the mix, that's when it became toxic.
A little over a year after joining the police force, Seth fell down some stairs at the couple's home and had to go on medical leave. Now, along with the alcohol, there were pain pills, and the sisters say the fighting seemed to be escalating.
You could hear it, like on phone calls.
His tone and demeanor around her.
I would ask, you want me to call 911? Can I call 911?
She would tell you, no, don't call. We've just been drinking. Everything will be okay later on. Maybe she knew her situation would become even worse,
Then things did get worse. On January 28, 2020, just days before her death, Amanda called 911.
Putnam County Sheriff's Office, could you help, please?
Yes, thank you. She called me. She had barricaded herself in a back bedroom.
It's my husband. He's putting his hands on me.
She ended up having to run next door.
He locked me out of the house, and I'm just trying to get my things out of the house, please. She's at the neighbor's house right now.
Another sheriff's dispatcher was alerted.
And she said her husband is an officer with the Eatonton Police Department.
That second dispatcher said he knew Seth Peralt and said he had a reputation.
I ain't supposed to know this, but he's been out of work with his back, and apparently he's over there whipping up on her ass.
Seth made local headlines when he was arrested on charges of simple battery and family violence.
She told me, would I come get her the next morning? And I told her yes, to make sure to pack everything, have it ready.
Instead, Amanda decided to attend Seth's bond hearing. When the judge agreed to release Seth on bail, he asked Amanda if she wanted a stay-away order added. Amanda said no, and then let Seth come home.
Because she was scared. She knew he was mad. She knew that it was public, that he had been arrested. He's a police officer. I have to bring him home and make this right. I talked to her the day he got out, and I said, how are things? And she said, he's being unusually nice.
Alicia says she doubted Seth's new attitude and felt that underneath he must be seething, knowing that if he was convicted on abuse charges, he was in danger of losing custody of his daughter and his job.
He knew he was going to embarrass his family, and he had already put himself up here on this pedestal like he was king, and then to be humiliated in front of people, I think it made him very angry.
Alicia says Amanda was terrified and looking for a way out.
We were all on a chain message, and we were telling her, just get out, divorce him, tell his father that you don't want anything but a vehicle. And she said, I'm not trying to get killed.
Just 5 days later, Amanda was dead. Sheriff Howard Sills says that from the very start of his investigation into the death of Amanda Peralt, he wasn't buying her husband's story.
I knew something was wrong the day I walked in the house.
For starters, the position of Amanda's body, depicted in this 48 hours animation based on the crime scene photos, left Sills certain that Amanda could not have shot herself.
Okay, this is the actual gun.
Also of concern to Sills was the way this Smith & Wesson 380, which belonged to Seth, was found lying next to Amanda's body with its magazine ejected.
The magazine, it was near her right side, and the pistol itself was way down here below her left foot.
What made the ejected magazine even more curious, says Sills, is the fact that there was a bullet found inside the gun's chamber.
It's a semi-automatic gun, so when it fires, the slide comes back, the spent cartridge casing is ejected, and it picks up the next round.
Because of that bullet in the chamber, the magazine had to be ejected after the gun was fired, says Sills. And unless the gun is defective, the only way to eject the magazine is to push this button.
Now, don't do this at home, but when you do this, how are you gonna get your second hand around there to do it?
There was also no blood on Amanda's hands or the long sleeves of her shirt, and something else caught the sheriff's eye.
In the middle of the closet, on the floor, was a damp green towel. Somebody had dried off with it, no doubt about that.
One of the first deputies on the scene said Seth smelled like shampoo. Also alarming, the bedroom was littered with 20 miniature bottles of Fireball whiskey, all of them empty. Sills says he didn't have the manpower to process the scene, so he called in agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. While they collected physical evidence and Amanda's body was transported to the state medical examiner, Sills focused on Seth.
He came in and sat right in this blue leather chair.
Seth spoke to Sills in his office for over an hour without an attorney present.
I'm not going to lie to you. I have no reason to lie to you.
I wanted to know what had happened that day. How did the magazine get out of the gun? How did the gun get where it was?
Did you touch that gun today?
The 380?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been no.
Today?
No, sir.
How does her body get into that position?
No answer.
Because he never touched her.
No, never touched her.
But Sills says that didn't make any sense, so he kept pressing. And then Seth changed his story.
How are you? Maybe I did. I don't know. I probably did touch her. I was probably hugging the out of her. And I was probably like, I'm so, like, honey, what the hell's going on?
Sheriff Sills says Seth tried several times to deflect questions with his badge.
I take pride in being a good law enforcement agent.
And I can't remember how many times he looked me in the eye and said, I'm a good police officer.
I'm a good officer. I'm a good police officer. I'm a good police officer. I'm a good officer. I'm a good police officer.
Amanda, he said, also knew what a good cop he was and how assault charges would ruin both their lives.
She hated to see my reputation destroyed on the news because she knows what a good police officer I am. And she was so worried I'd lose my daughter. She wanted to come down here and tell you that it was a lie.
Seth insisted that Amanda had lied the day she called 911 and felt so bad about it that she wanted to confess to perjury.
He said that she had written something that she intended to bring to me, recanting what she had told the deputies, and he told me where it was.
This handwritten letter was found in Amanda's nightstand. It reads in part, I, Amanda Perrault, would like to retract my statement. My husband never put his hands on me ever. I feel horrible for the humiliation I put my husband and my family through. I am willing to take any punishment I may deserve for what I have done.
I don't deny she wrote it, but look at the penmanship. There's not the slightest error of any kind. What we've got here is an inexperienced police officer dictating what's to be written.
Like Sills, Amanda's sisters are certain Seth was behind the letter.
She wrote it, but she was coached. I think he was telling her, I need you to write this to get me out of trouble.
But Seth told Sills he was not about to let Amanda confess to lying to authorities.
I knew if she came down here, it was a false statement and a felony. I knew it.
But according to Seth, Amanda couldn't take the guilt anymore, so she put his gun to her head and pulled the trigger.
She looked at me and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I put you through this. Boom. I couldn't even say a word, Sheriff. It was done.
Seth tried to convince Sills that Amanda killed herself because her call to 911 had potentially ruined their lives. But the sheriff didn't see that as a reason for suicide. Instead, he saw a motive for murder. Believing that Amanda would never take her own life, this made sense to her sisters as well.
He had to make it look like she took her life so that he could be cleared of all this wrongdoing.
Sheriff Sills says he was convinced that Seth Perrault was somehow involved in his wife's death. But that day, he felt he didn't have enough to arrest him.
I wanted to see if I could get some more evidence. And I did.
One of the clues that convinced Sheriff Sills that Seth Perrault wasn't telling the truth were his actions just 20 minutes before he reported his wife, Amanda, was dead. That's when Sills' deputy, Terrell Abernathy, arrived at his front door, trying to deliver paperwork on an upcoming case.
They had one of those video doorbell things, and I rang that.
The scene was captured in this video.
I expected him to answer the door, and I expected to hand him his copy of the subpoena. I mean, you're a policeman, you know how this works.
Abernathy says he could tell someone was home.
And what'd you hear?
I heard footsteps or footfalls, heavy ones. I'm announcing myself, who I am, what it is. I even turned my back to the door. I don't care if you're in your underwear, just answer the door and take the paper.
He waited 7 minutes and then left, subpoena still in hand.
In my heart, I believe that Amanda Perrault had already been shot when Abernathy rang the doorbell. I think he was concerned that somebody heard the gunshot, and that's why he didn't go to the door.
District Attorney Wright Barksdale believes Seth was trying to figure out what to do next.
Think about this. He's in the process of staging this scene, and he hears the doorbell ring. Can you imagine what was going through his mind?
But attorney Justin Kenney says that is not what happened.
Why didn't they come to the door when Deputy Abernathy rang that bell?
Fear of what he's bringing. Seth is afraid that his ex is about to serve him with custody modification paperwork.
What does that say happened after that?
So I believe there is a heated discussion that takes place. He lays down, diffuse the situation, he lays down to take a nap. He awoke to Amanda mumbling something, whispering something, and her pulling the trigger and shooting herself.
Kenney points out that Amanda was impaired by alcohol, 3 times the legal limit when tested by the medical examiner. That and the escalating tension in her marriage became a deadly combination.
The nice house, the daughter, the financial security, all of this was crumbling around Amanda. And then you tack on a 0.23 blood alcohol content. She thought that that was the only way to fix it, to end it.
She was really drunk.
Absolutely.
Maybe she accidentally shot the gun.
How'd she accidentally get the magazine out of it? How'd she accidentally get posed as she was?
Sills was also very troubled because Seth didn't call 911 when his wife allegedly shot herself. Instead, Perrault called his boss, the Eatonton chief of police, on his cell phone. 48 hours made several unsuccessful attempts to reach the former chief for comment.
Obviously, we're not going to have a recording of that, and they have at least a 20-minute conversation before I'm called.
Hoping the Perrault's neighbors had heard something the day Amanda died, Sills had Deputy Abernathy go back to the Perrault house to question them. What he learned made Sills even more suspicious about Seth's involvement in Amanda's death.
We found out that there had been a true pattern of domestic violence for years and years.
Neighbors said the couple could be heard fighting nearly every day, and in their eyes, Seth was almost always the aggressor.
They told stories about a physical altercation between Seth and Amanda where he actually grabbed her by the back of the hair and pulled her down and pushed her into the driveway.
One neighbor told Abernathy that he would often stand by in case things got really violent.
He talked about how at times he would just stand in the yard and just wait to see if he needed to call 911 because it was so violent over there.
Another neighbor said that Amanda had twice made this chilling comment.
That if she were to wind up dead, that Peralta is the one that did it, and she made this neighbor promise that she would insist that her death be investigated as homicide.
Did anyone call the police?
No.
Why not?
Well, one of the answers was that, well, we were scared to call because he was the police.
It's hurtful. It's hurtful. And this is why I wanted to do this show, is to make sure that people know to speak up.
The day Amanda died, the neighbors said they didn't hear a thing. The only witness to what happened was Seth Peralta, and Sills was sure he couldn't trust him after the interview in his office.
According to Seth, they take the child to school, they come back home, and they go nowhere at all other than down the street to the convenience store. Well, that didn't happen. He lied.
Sills says the proof was on this surveillance camera footage of the couple, found 12 miles away at this drive-through liquor store, where Amanda bought those 20 miniature bottles of Fireball whiskey.
She drives up this drive-in window. Right there's the camera that catches the truck.
I see it.
Simultaneously, Seth was captured on a camera next door at this convenience store.
You see him walk, and he actually comes down, I believe it's this aisle. And he walks, and he gets something to drink.
This video, says Barksdale, would become a crucial piece of evidence, not because of what was purchased, but because of what Seth was wearing. This Pink Floyd t-shirt and these black athletic pants. Nearly 4 hours later, when sheriff's deputies arrived at the Peralta home to investigate Amanda's death, Seth was wearing something else.
When we get there, he is dressed in shorts and a dark t-shirt.
And the clothing Seth was wearing in the video?
We found those in the washing machine.
The clothing was dry and had clearly not been laundered. But there was that deputy who had reported that Seth smelled freshly washed. And there was that damp towel that was found on the closet floor.
Seth says he took a bath.
Seth's attorney, Justin Kenny, says Seth did wash up at some point.
After you take a bath, you're going to change clothes. There was no evidence that the washing machine had actually been turned on. It looked like the washing machine was being used as a laundry basket.
Only a tiny speck of blood was found on the backside of Peralta's pants, and a trace amount of gunpowder residue was found on his left hand when tested.
They did it 3 hours later after potential contamination from being at the police station.
Amanda's hands were never tested, and the gun was never dusted for fingerprints. But Sills felt he now had enough evidence to make an arrest. Just 2 days after Amanda's shooting, now former Eatonton police officer Seth Peralta was taken into custody.
Sheriff Sills called me and let me know that they were going to arrest him for her murder. And my whole family just was so relieved and happy that
she was getting justice.
Yes.
But before a grand jury could hear the evidence and decide if there was enough to go to trial, COVID shut down the courts. Seth would sit in this jail for nearly 9 months until that autopsy report was released by the medical examiner, declaring Amanda's death a suicide. Her decision was based primarily on the lack of gunpowder around the wound, which meant the gun would have to have been right up against Amanda's head when it went off, and there were no signs of a struggle.
Nobody is just going to allow somebody to put a gun to their head and pull the trigger without putting up some sort of fight.
The first thing I just called the DA. I said, you're not going to believe this.
Did you think maybe you made a mistake?
Absolutely not. We're going to take every bit of the evidence and try to piece this thing together.
But Justin Kenny did think the prosecution was making a mistake and that the autopsy report was all the evidence needed to defend Seth Peralta.
I mean, it seemed pretty open shut to me.
It was November 3rd, 2020, and Seth Perrault, still unindicted, had been in jail for nearly 9 months. When COVID restrictions finally eased, a grand jury was set to decide if there was enough evidence against him to go to trial.
And you know the first thing I put up for that grand jury to see?
The crime scene pictures.
No, ma'am. The autopsy report that said suicide. Ladies and gentlemen, the State Crime Lab medical examiner says this was a suicide. Now, I'm going to show you the evidence I found.
Members of the grand jury did see the crime scene photos and heard evidence of domestic abuse, and quickly decided that despite the medical examiner's report, Seth Perrault should face a jury of his peers.
What were the charges?
Malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault.
Perrault pled not guilty to all charges. At his trial in February of 2022, he decided not to testify, leaving defense attorney Justin Kenney to tell his story.
I think there was a complete absence of sufficient evidence that Seth killed his wife.
The prosecution showed a jury of 8 women and 4 men the crime scene photos, including the way Amanda's body and the gun were found. They also heard testimony from that sheriff's deputy who thought Seth smelled freshly showered. They watched the footage of Deputy Abernathy at the Perrault's front door and listened to all 60 minutes of Perrault's interview with Sheriff Sills.
I don't know how this happened.
District Attorney Barksdale says that some of the most compelling evidence was found on Amanda's cell phone. Like this video she recorded 7 months prior to her death.
It's sad because you know what? I married you, and I'm not gonna, dude, you're done. I'm done.
Amanda's sisters were seeing the video for the first time.
It made me angry.
I want to have a good weekend. You burn that up when you try to put that phone in my face.
What phone in your face?
Oh, right there. Oh, your videotape.
Yeah, because you're being and I'm gonna show you tomorrow.
You didn't videotape all the you when you hit me and smacked me.
Hit you? Yeah. You fucking choked me 8 times.
The video was problematic, but it doesn't show everything that took place. Seth also states that she had acted violently toward him as well.
There was no evidence of Seth having been abused introduced at trial. But Amanda's phone also contained photos of her with bruises, a black eye, and a split lip, along with texts like this one to her sisters. Seth just choked me till I nearly passed out, busted my lip wide open.
I was scared that one of them might get hurt.
This is Seth's then 8-year-old daughter being interviewed by a forensic child psychologist. Remember, she was a witness to what happened the day Amanda called 911.
They were cussing at each other. Miss Amanda was cussing too, but she didn't touch Daddy at all. Daddy was like touching her nose like this, like, get out of my house right now.
The jury was shown most of the interview.
She was on the floor like this, trying to get her stuff. Then all of a sudden, Daddy just started grabbing her arms, and Daddy just pushed her over the laundry table and then opened the door and pushed her out the door.
While her father spent the night in jail, she said Amanda begged her not to tell anyone what happened, or there could be deadly consequences.
Amanda tells her that night, if your daddy loses custody of you, he's going to shoot me dead.
Your daddy would come shoot me dead.
But when Barksdale called the now 10-year-old to the witness stand, she said she couldn't recall what happened that day or what she said in the interview.
She, I think, felt really torn. I seen her look at her dad a couple times. I felt like she was more careful about what she was saying, like somebody had been coaching her.
In cross-examination, the defense asked if anyone had coached her on what to say. She said no. But Justin Kenney says he believes another prosecution witness may have been coached, a jailhouse informant named Jack Falk, who had shared a dorm block with Seth Perrault.
Jack Falk has a criminal history, I believe 28 pages long, numerous contacts with the police, and he had every incentive to lie and make up a story.
Folk had come forward 3 weeks before the medical examiner's report was released, claiming he had valuable information about Amanda's death.
He knew things that only Seth Peralt could have told him.
In these 2 handwritten letters, Folk claimed that Seth told him the camera catching him with the clothes on was his biggest concern. He also claimed that Seth said he had been giving Amanda painkillers all day and that she was passed out at the time of her death.
I think he was in the bed with her after she was passed out and held the gun against her head.
He was behind her?
Behind her or slightly to the side.
The defense argued that Amanda shot herself because her lies about Seth assaulting her had potentially ruined their lives. Furthermore, only that tiny trace of gunshot residue was found on Peralt's left hand, and there was just that one speck of blood found on his clothing. Justin Kenny says the hardest thing for the defense to explain was the way Amanda's body was found.
We knew that it was going to be a problem. The body had to be moved in some way, had to be touched in some way.
Kenny says there is one explanation that makes sense to him. Something Peralt said in his interview with Sheriff Sills.
I probably did touch her. I was probably hugging the out of her.
And that would potentially account for her arms being by her sides.
As for the way Seth's gun was found beside Amanda's body with the ejected magazine by her side, the defense hired an expert who testified he fired the gun 6 times, and after one of those firings, the magazine spontaneously ejected.
It shows that that firearm can drop the magazine when it's fired.
Howard Sills took that very gun out and shot it several times. The GBI examined that gun, didn't notate in their report any malfunctions whatsoever.
Dr. Laura, L-O-R-A, Darasaw.
Then there was the medical examiner, Laura Darasaw. Barksdale called her to the stand and asked her to explain how she came to her conclusion of suicide as the manner of death.
What I wanted the jury and for her to see, she did not consider all the evidence. She had not considered Seth's daughter's interview. She had not considered the cell phone data, the prior domestic abuse.
You didn't videotape all the
But Dr. Darasaw defended her conclusion, and in this statement to 48 Hours, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation backed her up. Our agency stands behind the original expert opinion of Peralt's death.
Were you worried at all about the verdict?
What I try to remind myself, it is my job to pursue justice and to present a case for the jury to consider. And if they were to walk him out the door, I would be able to look to Amanda Peralt's family and say, we did everything we could.
Go inside the case and see more of the evidence at 48hours.com.
When they called us all back in, we all just held hands and dropped our head.
It had been just under 2.5 hours when the jury in the murder trial of Seth Peralt announced that they had reached a verdict.
I just remember praying, saying, God, just please, please do this for our family. Let us have justice for our sister.
And justice is what they feel they got. The verdict, guilty of murder.
It was bittersweet because we got justice, but it didn't bring her back. It didn't bring our best friend back.
That same day, Peralt was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
I want many years of him praying to God and being on his knees that he would have took his own life instead of my sister's.
Justin Kenny says he believes an innocent man is now behind bars for life.
My heart sank. I've known Seth for almost a decade now, and I don't think he did it.
Every August on her birthday, Amanda's sisters honor her memory by releasing love letters tied to purple balloons.
I love you, Amanda. I hope you're having a beautiful birthday in heaven. Happy birthday, dear Amanda. Happy birthday to you.
In 2022, the notes also included the National Domestic Abuse Hotline number.
And hopefully this will find somebody that really needs it.
We just want to create awareness around domestic abuse and for people to don't sit back and just let it happen, no matter what the victim is telling you. Fight for them, you know, help them any way you can. There's so many things I wish I could go back now and do different. I wish I could go back and save her.
You're gonna save somebody with this.
I hope so.
Taken from her friends and family too soon.
She was artistic, she was creative, she was smart, she was feisty.
A murderer roams free for too long.
There was that constant fear. Is this gonna happen again?
You will never forget Sarah Yarborough. 48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Amy wrote, "Shadows are created around us whenever something or someone blocks the light. We are created to live in the light. He is calling me out of the darkness. Turn toward the light and the truth."
Amy's outlet was her journaling. She wrote to me about the Bible and having faith. I believe that her faith was important to her because she lived by her faith. She was the salt of the earth, genuine and loving. I found out that Amy had passed in a phone call from our mutual friend. In the next sentence, I found out how she had passed. It's not a phone call, you want to get.
911, this line is recorded. What's the address of your emergency?
Hi, this is Brian Fanyon. I'm at North Road. My wife just shot herself. Can you send me some help?
All right, Brian, we'll get him right out there, okay?
I remember my supervisor telling me we have a death investigation in Westfield, and it's a police officer's wife. That was a rarity to me. I had not experienced a case like that.
She's gone. I'm sorry. God.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yes, yes.
Brian's role at the Westfield Police Department, he was their evidence guy in the Detective Bureau.
We both knew Brian. He was very well respected.
When you walked in the Fanyon house, what did you see?
Then I walked into the dining room, and that's when I observed the body of Amy Fanyon and a pool of blood on the floor.
With a gunshot to the right side of her head.
I saw the .45 caliber Smith & Wesson firearm on the stairs that led to the breezeway. There was a police radio, paperwork, mail, and so forth, chairs pushed about.
And on top of this dining room table, you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich intact on a plate. You had an empty plate that had some blood smear on it.
What was Brian's demeanor when you arrived?
He seemed like he was in a state of shock. He was looking straight ahead.
She snapped. The gun just exploded. It was just so quick. Didn't hesitate at all.
I'm the only one that could make her that angry.
I offered him my condolences. I told Brian that, that I was going to conduct a thorough investigation, that it was going to be by the numbers.
Is it standard for the district attorney's office to be involved in a suicide investigation?
Yes. Part of our duties at the district attorney's office was to investigate all deaths.
What can this deceased tell us about what happened right before she found herself in that state? So I'm taking in everything that I can about that scene, and I saw the entry wound to her head. It didn't seem right in that moment. How would something like that happen?
It was 1 p.m. on May 8, 2018, when Massachusetts State Police detectives arrived at a farmhouse in Westfield. 51-year-old Amy Fannion lay dead in the dining room from a single gunshot wound to the head. Detective Mike McNally.
Amy was essentially in a pile of blood that was beginning to congeal under her left side.
Amy's husband, Brian Fannion, a detective in the Westfield Police Department, had called 911 minutes earlier, reporting that his wife had shot herself. The dining room, rearranged to accommodate medical personnel, was in disarray as detectives worked to identify clues of what may have happened.
There was a blood spatter around that window frame from that dining room into the breezeway. There was a pair of glasses that looked like it had some kind of red-brown spatter on it.
And then there was the bullet. Detectives Brendan O'Toole and Mike Blanchett.
The actual projectile was in that front enclosed porch area. The spent shell casing was still in the dining room.
We could see the direction that it traveled through Amy's head. That round impacted that dresser, came to a rest right around there in the breezeway.
Brian was sitting in a chair with his back to the wall. And he's with the chief of police from the Westfield Police Department, who's talking with him. Everyone was in a state of shock.
Everyone, including Amy's brother, Eric Hansen, who told detectives that he had just finished playing disc golf behind the house when he heard Brian's cry for help. And that's when he walked into the house, saw Amy on the floor, a gun next to her, and Brian holding Amy's hand.
So he picked up the gun himself and moved it out of Brian's reach.
Because he was worried about Brian's state of mind, having just lost his wife.
Yes.
What kind of gun was used?
It was a Smith & Wesson M&P 45, Brian Fannion's duty weapon.
Did that give you any pause that it was Brian Fannion's weapon?
Yes, it gave me pause. At this point, I know that I'm going to really do a detailed investigation.
To avoid conflict of interest, O'Toole said he decided that his unit, the Massachusetts State Police, would be the sole investigators, and he wanted to get Brian away from the house to get a statement.
I asked if he would accompany me to the Massachusetts State Police Barracks in Russell, and I took a tape-recorded statement from him. Tuesday, May 8th, it's 2:41 p.m. I'm with Brian Fannion. Brian, do you understand I got a recorder on right now?
Yes.
Brian told Detective O'Toole that he left his office at the Westfield Police Station around 11:45 a.m. and drove to North Road to meet his wife, who was on her way home to prepare their lunch.
What was she making?
Butter and jelly sandwiches.
Brian said that when he arrived, they continued an argument from the night prior. An argument that had gotten pretty heated that evening.
Oh, when you say heated, I guess, well,
Just, I don't know, She just was very angry.
Okay. What was the argument about?
I'm retiring soon. We're discussing what each of us expects retirement to be.
Brian said he told Amy that he didn't want to spend his retirement maintaining their 200-year-old home, which Amy still loved. They also discussed their aging dog and his reluctance to get another one.
I don't want to be tied down by a dog. She always wants to have a dog. I want to travel more than she does.
According to Brian, that afternoon during lunch, Amy told him she had scheduled them to attend a family member's play on the day Brian wanted to attend a disc golf tournament.
And I just said, I don't like that stuff. Why would you commit me without asking?
That's when, according to Brian, things soon took a turn for the worse.
I took my gun out of the holster and put it on our hutch because I had to use the bathroom.
Where's the hutch located?
In the dining room.
Brian said he closed the bathroom door, and when he came out, Amy had the gun in her hand.
She has the gun pointed up to the right side of her head. What did you hear her say?
I think she said, I guess you don't want me around, or you don't want to be around me.
Was she seated or
No, she stood up.
She was standing? Okay.
According to Brian, he was 4 to 5 feet away when he tried to stop Amy from pulling the trigger.
Tried to get to her. I almost did. The gun just exploded. It was just so quick. Didn't hesitate at all. I just went over and I just held her hands. Tried to... Just held her hands.
911, the sign is recorded. What's the address?
Brian called 911 and yelled out to Amy's brother Eric for help.
Eric, how do you spell your last name? Hansen.
Hansen.
Eric told detectives that Brian said he and Amy had been having a tense argument.
And she grabbed the gun. He just was so distraught.
What did he say what they were arguing about?
No, I was just trying to console him and say, it's not your fault, it's not your fault.
Amy's death had shocked the Westfield community.
My name is Stephanie Barry, and I'm a reporter for The Republican in Springfield, Massachusetts. Amy's maiden name was Hansen. She came from a fairly large family. She and her sisters were all known as some of the prettiest girls in school, some of the smartest, and some of the nicest.
It was 1983 when 16-year-old Amy met 19-year-old Brian Fannion. Fannion came from a long line of police officers and politicians, and in Westfield, the Fannion name was a source of pride.
The Fannions were kind of like the Kennedys of Westfield. They were well regarded.
Brian and Amy tied the knot in 1985, and the couple eventually had 2 children, Travis and Victoria. Amy's close friend, Terry Liccardi, says Amy loved being a stay-at-home mom.
Amy's focus was raising her children. She thought that being a parent was the best job in the whole world.
The Fannions, deeply committed to their faith, dedicated their lives to God and community service, with Brian serving as a church deacon and working as a missionary to build wells in Mexico. After 30 years of marriage, the Fannions were planning their next phase of life when those plans derailed.
Is there any knowledge that Amy Fannion had any mental health issues or suffered from depression?
So I asked Brian, and he mentioned many years earlier when she was having some psychological issues and was on medicine for a period of time. Other than that, nothing recent.
But what Brian did stress was that Amy had bouts with anger.
She had a temper, but she hid it well from everyone but me. She only got that angry when we were alone.
Midway into the interview, Detective O'Toole asked Brian if there were any female friends in his life.
I have a woman who lives in Pittsfield that I met recently. I did a mission trip to Mexico, and we became good friends.
What's that lady's name?
Corey.
Does she have a last name or Corey?
Yeah, Knowles. Knowles. You guys aren't going to contact her, are you?
For Detective O'Toole, Brian Fanion's admitted friendship with another woman raised questions. Brian had told detectives that Corinne Knowles, known as Corey, was a fellow missionary at a nearby church. The two met in November 2017 on a mission trip in Mexico, and a friendship developed. But it had never gone beyond that.
An emotional affair?
He said there was some flirting, but he qualified it that it wasn't
sexual.
It was not his term was, it was not a friends with benefits.
At the end of the interview, Detective O'Toole asked Brian to turn over his personal phone.
I turned off the recorder. And that's when Brian told me, he was like, you're going to see some things on there, and it's not what it appears to be.
A red flag for you?
Yeah, there's several red flags. As an investigator, you have to keep an open mind.
Within a week of Brian's interview, on May 14, 2018, Amy's wake was held. Brian planted a tree in nearby Stanley Park in his wife's memory. But the investigation into her sudden death was just beginning. Detectives recovered a treasure trove of deleted text messages from Brian's phone.
There were just hundreds of texts that expanded the relationship that he was having with Corey.
On May 7th, the day before Amy died, Brian and Corey exchanged 72 text messages until 9:47 p.m. that evening. In one exchange at 9:23 p.m., Brian writes, "Good night, my love. I hope you have wonderful dreams of amazing days and nights to come." And Corey responds, "Good night, my love. I will dream of you and all that the future holds for us." The next morning at 10:30 a.m., Corey texts, "When can I hold you again?" To which Brian responds, "Not soon enough," turning into a very long morning.
And within an hour or two, Amy Fanion is dead.
Yes.
Head en route for a female party who possibly intentionally shot herself. Police en route.
Brian has not been entirely truthful to us at this point. And so we want to speak with him again.
On May 17, 2018, 3 days after Amy's wake, Brian Fanion arrived at the district attorney's state police office for another round of questioning.
Brian, so we just need to, clarify some things. We do know your Miranda rights. I'm going to read them off this form.
The other day you didn't do this. Has something changed?
So you're not under arrest or anything?
Well, I know that.
And on that same day across town, detectives met with Corey Knowles to learn more about her involvement with Brian.
If somebody was to say, "Who's Corey? Who are you?"
Corey Knowles, a 48-year-old wife, grandmother, and member of her church's choir, told detectives that Brian's friendship helped her work through a troubled second marriage.
Brian's very easy to talk to. Nothing but affirmation and love, and I'm here for you.
But over time, their relationship moved from friendship to flirtation.
Did I feel passion for him? Absolutely.
By April 16, 2018, 5 months into Brian and Corey's relationship, their texting gave way to something more intimate when Corey visited Brian's house before they left for volunteer work.
Was that the first time you were intimate that you kissed on that April day, the 16th?
Yeah.
And then where was that?
I want to say the kitchen. Because I got there before Amy got home.
Corey told detectives that by late April, she and Brian were having passionate makeout sessions in her truck.
Brian left work early, met up with Corey in Westfield at Stanley Park, and they made out. There was some sexual touching.
But according to Corey, Brian could not perform.
A little bit more like, because I'm still married to Amy.
We've seen the text messages. In all honesty, Brian, it looks like it's a lot more than a friendship, you know.
I know it escalated, and I'm completely embarrassed by it, ashamed of it. Shouldn't have happened.
But a lot of people have affairs and
Correct.
don't kill their wife.
Correct.
Detective O'Toole then asks Brian to go back over his statement of what happened, beginning at the moment when Brian said he placed his gun on the hutch and went inside the bathroom.
All right, so you come out of the bathroom, right? And she's at the table. Where just indicate like where between the table and the hutch? Yeah. And a chair right there?
I don't know if she was sitting or standing. I think she was standing.
I mean,
no, I think she was sitting.
Now, when we were trying to get these step-by-step details, he seemed to be wavering.
So you come out of the bathroom, okay, and then what's the first thing that happens?
I just remember her saying that you obviously don't want me around.
And then Detective O'Toole asked Brian to demonstrate what Amy did with the gun.
Just remember seeing her hand come up with the gun.
Towards her head?
Yeah.
So she puts it to the side of her head?
Yes.
Okay. And where was the gun when it went off? Was it in the same?
Right to her head.
But there is a problem. What Brian did not know was that a CSI report and Amy's autopsy results had arrived.
The gunshot entrance wound was not consistent with a self-inflicted wound.
Fair to say it took this case in a whole new direction?
Yes.
During the second interview with Brian Fannion, detectives O'Toole and Blanchett found themselves facing a challenge that tested their experience as investigators.
This is not a normal interview for myself and Mike. We've done thousands of interviews. You know, we're pretty good at it, but it's hard when it's a police officer because he knows exactly how we work. It was a difficult interview. There's a problem.
Detectives laid out what they considered to be crucial evidence in their investigation.
There's no indication whatsoever so far that she had a gun close to the side of her head.
Well, then you're wrong, because she did, because I saw it and it happened.
You know,
how do you say there's no indication?
Well, I mean, that's what it's showing us right now.
The medical examiner listed Amy's manner of death as undetermined. And combined with CSI findings, investigators did not believe that Amy died of a self-inflicted wound.
I mean, there's no doubt she was shot, but the question is, from what distance?
It was right freaking there, I'm telling you. Well, do what you need to, but I'm telling you, it was right there.
In Amy's case, distance mattered. This is because with self-inflicted gunshot wounds, debris known as gunshot residue is expelled from the firearm and leaves a distinct pattern on and inside the wound known as stippling, as demonstrated here.
Like, Brian, you understand, like, guns and stippling and all that stuff?
I do, and I can't...
There's none on her, Brian. There's none on her.
There has to be, because the gun was there, right freaking there.
There's none on her.
Then they're wrong. I'm telling you, they're flat out wrong, because it was right freaking there.
The other option is you got pissed and you're a few feet away and you shot her in the head when she's sitting eating a peanut butter sandwich.
Didn't happen.
Didn't happen?
Did not happen.
With Fannion's affair exposed and CSI reports in hand, detectives suspected Fannion had likely shot his wife, but they still needed more evidence. On May 24, 2018, detectives obtained a search warrant for Fannion's home, and when detectives arrived,
Brian asked if I was there to arrest him, and I told him I wasn't, and then he asked me if I thought he did it.
Were you surprised he asked you that?
I was noting it. I didn't know how to feel, and I didn't answer his question.
detectives took additional measurements to analyze the trajectory of the bullet. Fanion's home electronics were confiscated, and at the same time, his desktop computer and laptop at the Westfield police station were seized for data extraction.
Do you see any signs that Brian Fanion planned to kill his wife? Any evidence that points to that?
We see a totality of all the evidence here. We're not the fact finders. We're detectives, so we collect all this information, and then it's going to be presented. Someone else is going to make a determination on that.
And that someone would be Hampton County Assistant District Attorney Mary Sandstrom. New to the Homicide Division, Sandstrom had arrived in Massachusetts by way of New York.
Is it fair to say you were a fish out of water a bit?
It's always hard not being from the area in which you prosecute. It's a very small, very intimately connected town. So, yes, you're never at an advantage where you don't know everybody by name.
Adding to the difficulty, Brian Fanion is a detective.
Yes. Yeah.
And respected.
Very much in that community.
As spring gave way to summer, Corey ended her relationship with Fanion, and by early 2019, Fanion retired from the police force. The investigation into Amy's death continued.
We're still trying to get some testing done because we want to have as strong a case as possible before we go in before the grand jury.
And a complication in the form of a letter was among the case files. Amy's family members expressed their unfailing support of Brian Fanion, saying, "We are certain Amy took her own life." The letter was signed by Amy's siblings and even her own mother.
That's got to be tough for you.
It's an awkward position for a prosecutor where your victim family isn't supporting you. It was an odd spot to be in.
An odd spot, perhaps, but not a deterrent. On November 6, 2019, 17 months after Amy died, detectives arrived at Brian Fanion's door.
Brian came to the dining room door pretty quickly, as I recall it, and he said something to the effect of, "Come in." Then Mike Blanchette began to describe to Brian, "We have an arrest warrant for you."
Police say Brian Fanion told them that his wife shot herself with his gun while he was at home on a lunch break last year.
I remember telling him, "Put your hands behind your back." I took out my handcuffs.
Through their investigation, they only solidified their suspicion that Brian pulled the trigger.
He was eating assorted nuts, was popping some in his mouth, and as he put his hands behind his back, he let him drop to the floor. We transported Brian to the Russell State Police Barracks. And he's processed, photographed, fingerprinted.
He stands accused of killing his wife in what was originally reported.
I assessed a feeling of despair on Brian's face, like, I can't believe this is happening.
Stephanie Barry, a crime reporter at the Republican newspaper, recalls the unusual scene that played out 15 miles away in Springfield, Massachusetts, inside the Hampton County Superior Court in early November 2019.
There's no one who spent any amount of time in Westfield who didn't know who Brian Fanion was. It was a pretty full house, and the kind of palpable shock remained throughout the entire proceeding.
Fanion, who appeared for his initial arraignment, entered a plea of not guilty, and sitting right behind him were members of both Brian's and Amy's family.
I can't think of another instance when I've seen the family of a victim sticking up for the accused murderer of their loved one.
And despite the absence of support from members of Amy's family, ADA Sandstrom continued to build her case.
What was Amy Fanion like?
She sounds like a fairy tale. Giving, selfless, completely dedicated to her family.
According to Sandstrom, the night before Amy died, she was making a gift for an upcoming baby shower that she planned to attend and was texting her daughter Victoria.
Did anyone ever say that Amy was ever suicidal?
She wasn't a person who was ready to die. Amy was healthy, she was happy.
What do you think Brian Fanion's motive was?
He was ready to start a new chapter of his life that did not include Amy Fanion. He's chosen his life partner in Corey. Amy's the only thing standing in the way now.
And that's always the million-dollar question. Why not divorce?
He can't divorce Amy for how he's going to be seen in this community. Divorce is public, but in his mind, murder doesn't have to be.
The trial started today for a former Westfield police officer who's accused of murdering his wife.
On February 23, 2023, in what would be Westfield's most publicized case, Brian Fanion's trial began. He faced a life sentence for the first-degree murder of his wife. 48 Hours made several interview requests to Brian Fanion, his attorney Jeffrey Brown, as well as family members of both Amy and Brian, but never received a response.
This is a big case, a lot of attention. How are you feeling?
For any trial, you're always nervous. And this was probably the most high-profile case I've ever done.
Opening statements revealed conflicting accounts of the circumstances surrounding Amy Fanion's death.
The defendant was a deacon at Wyven Union Church and an officer for the Westfield Police Department. The evidence will show that while the defendant was repulsed by continuing his marriage with Amy, he couldn't divorce her either, leaving him trapped. And once that evidence is before you, I will ask you to find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree.
Fanion's defense focused on Amy's anger issues and claimed she suffered from anxiety. Brown alleged that on the day of Amy's death, an argument over Brian's retirement plans and his refusal to attend a family member's play pushed her over the edge.
In the days before Amy shot herself, Amy was very mad at him. You had to tread lightly around Amy for fear of setting her off. And at the conclusion of the evidence in this case, I'll ask that you find Brian Fanion not guilty. Thank you.
Anna Hansen, Amy's younger sister, was the first witness for the prosecution. She was the only family member who signed the letter of support that willingly testified against Brian Fanion. Anna stated that during the investigation into Amy's death, her brother-in-law confided that he was worried about searches he had conducted on his computer.
I asked him what that search was, and he said how to make a murder look like a suicide.
He specifically said he searched, quote, how to make a murder look like a suicide.
Those were his exact words.
Anna told the jury that when she asked her brother-in-law why he made this search, Fanion told her that Amy asked him to do it after they watched a CSI show. It was a show that Anna questioned if Amy had ever watched.
Did she ever say that she liked those shows?
She never shared that with me.
The prosecution's next witness was Fanion's former lover, a divorced Corey Knowles, now Corey Hasty, who told the jury that Fanion was concerned about ending his marriage.
Did the defendant ever talk about what could happen to him if he were to divorce Amy?
Yes. If Amy was to ever leave, or he divorced her, that she would take him for everything that he's got because he wouldn't be able to sustain on retirement at that point.
The prosecution called Tom Forrest from the Cybercrimes Unit. All of Fanion's devices were examined, but it was Fanion's office computer that produced some curious results. Forrest said Fanion visited
common and dangerous poisons, which drug causes the most deaths each year, 16 common household items that could kill you.
But it's only when this affair starts up that all of these incriminating searches start to appear.
Carbon monoxide, the invisible killer, household poisons, common prescription overdoses.
And 11 days prior to Amy's death, Fanion used his office computer to view a news report on YouTube called What Gunshot Residue Tests Tell Us.
He wasn't assigned to any active investigations in April and May of 2018 that would necessitate looking up gunshot residue. Nobody in the Westfield Police Department does gunshot residue testing.
I was trying to keep a very open mind about what the evidence was going to show, but I didn't think that was great news for Brian Fanion.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Detective John Shrine, a ballistic expert and a crucial witness for the prosecution, testified that Amy's wound was not self-inflicted. citing the absence of gunshot residue near the wound, coupled with the trajectory of the bullet. Shrine concluded that Amy Fannion was shot from a downward angle and at a distance of at least 18 inches, not at close range as Fannion had claimed.
Could you form an opinion as to whether or not the defendant's firearm was discharged at a distance of 18 inches or greater?
Over 18 inches. Without anything intervening, that's correct.
After 12 days of testimony and 27 witnesses, the prosecution rested. But waiting in the wings was a defense poised to introduce a significant element that could potentially unravel the DA's case.
Any prosecutor who's not worried about a defense probably isn't a good prosecutor.
What do you think is the most damning piece of evidence? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
Defense attorney Jeffrey Brown, whose client faced life in prison, launched a counterattack when he cross-examined Fannion's former lover, Corey Hasty. According to the state, Fannion's affair was the primary motive for murdering his wife. But Hasty admitted to the defense that when she ended their relationship, Fannion didn't try to stop her.
When ultimately you ended it with Brian, his response was okay. Isn't that right?
To my recollection.
He didn't say to you, oh my God, I killed Amy for you and you're leaving me? He never said that, right?
Correct.
And what about the websites Detective Forrest from the Cybercrimes Unit said Fannion visited?
Carbon monoxide, the invisible killer, common and dangerous poisons, 16 common household items that could kill you.
The defense argued that some of the websites he visited were related to an aging house, an old wood-burning stove, and the potential hazards it might pose to a young family member.
Did you know that the Fannions were beginning to have a young niece, a child, stay in their home during that time frame?
No, I did not.
But what the defense couldn't reconcile were Fannion searches about gunshot residue days before Amy's death. And there was Amy's sister, Anna, the only family member who willingly testified for the prosecution. She claimed that Brian told her he searched how to make a murder look like a suicide on his computer.
You didn't find any sites that were searched or visited relating to the terms how to make a murder look like a suicide. Isn't that true?
That is true.
The defense narrowed its focus and scrutinized Amy's personality by cross-examining Amy's own mother, Patricia Tarrant.
Did your daughter Amy have a temper?
Yes.
A temper, according to Amy's sister Holly, that would typically be directed toward her husband.
Well, did she snap at Brian in front of you?
She would. I was embarrassed for him. You don't usually talk to your husband kind of in that way. Maybe you reprimand a child, but not a husband.
But would Amy's temper lead to an impulsive decision such as grabbing Fannion's gun? According to Amy's son, Travis, it would.
I could easily picture or envision her grabbing the gun impulsively to make a point that she picked it up intending to complete a trigger pull and shoot herself.
But what would explain the lack of gunshot residue on Amy?
Her wound is consistent with a close-range gunshot wound based on
Alexander Jason, a senior certified crime scene analyst, testified for the defense.
That's the foundation of the whole prosecution. And this whole idea that it had to be 18 inches because of the absence of gunshot residue is not valid.
Jason says the lack of gunshot residue was not due to distance. It was due to Amy's hair. What could Amy Fannion's hair have told us?
Amy Fannion had very dense, thick hair. That will block the gunshot residue.
Jason's research, effect of hair on the deposition of gunshot residue, was published by the FBI's Forensic Science Journal in 2004. Jason says there could have been gunshot residue, commonly known as GSR, embedded in Amy's hair. The crime scene analyst did not test her hair.
What they should have done is taken the hair and then analyzed those little specks to see if they're gunshot residue or not, which was a mistake.
Jason's testimony was limited at trial. To support his theory, he and his daughter Juliana met us at a gun range in California to demonstrate what may have happened to Amy Fanyon.
I'm going to fire 2 times.
Using a .45 caliber gun and ammunition identical to what was found at the scene, Jason fired a single round into a mound of hair, backed by a ballistic skin simulant.
So you just shot a .45 caliber gun 3 inches away through hair.
Yes, Amy Fanyon had considerable hair, maybe more dense than this, where the bullet entered. And the hair will act as a filter and prevent the gunshot residue from reaching her skin.
For comparison, Jason positioned the gun at the same distance using identical ammunition and fired into the skin simulant without hair.
And I pull this away.
Wow.
You can see there's a big difference. Now look at that. That's a very clean wound. That's a very dirty wound.
That's incredible. All from the hair.
All from the hair. The hair acted as a filter.
Pretty fascinating.
While Jason believes this scenario is what happened to Amy Fanyon, he stopped short of saying whether or not Fanyon killed his wife.
The hair filtered that stuff out.
But what he does believe is that basing the case on the absence of gunshot residue is wrong.
And he should not be convicted on that basis. That's my bottom line.
After 40 witnesses and 15 days of testimony, closing arguments.
She raised the gun up to her head in a fit of rage and in effect caused her own death.
This defendant murdered Amy Fanyon with deliberate premeditation.
On March 21st, 2023, the jury got the case. And after 2 days of deliberations, the verdict.
What say you? Is the defendant guilty or not guilty? Guilty. Guilty of what? Guilty of what degree?
Brian Fanyon was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife, Amy Fanyon, and sentenced to life without parole that same day.
Brian's side of the aisle just collapsed in sobs. These people loved Brian and sincerely thought that he was innocent.
For Assistant District Attorney Mary Sandstrom, Fanyon's conviction was bittersweet and hard-won.
It's never a victory. Amy Fanyon should be here. She should be with her daughter and son and her now grandchildren, and she's not. And it was all for nothing so that Brian Fanyon could enjoy his life and end hers.
A mother disappears. Evidence points to homicide.
And she's nowhere to be found.
The suspect is gone too, leading U.S. Marshals on a relentless manhunt.
He was using the railways to move around, hopping trains.
The chase is on.
Justice is coming.
48 Hours, Saturday on CBS, streaming on Paramount+.